The Assassins is the name used to refer to the medieval Nizari Ismailis, often characterized as a secret order led by a mysterious old man of the mountain. The Nizari Ismailis were an Islamic sect that formed in the late 11th century from a split within Ismailism, itself a branch of Shi'i Islam. In time, the Nizaris began to pose a military threat to Sunni Seljuk authority within their territories by capturing and inhabiting many unconnected mountain fortresses throughout Persia under the leadership of Hassan I Sabah, therefore founding the so-called Nizari Ismaili state. While Assassins typically refers to the entire medieval Nizari sect, in fact only a class of acolytes known as the Fidai actually engaged in assassination work. Lacking their own army, the Nizari relied on these trained warriors to carry out espionage and assassinations of key enemy figures, and over the course of 300 years successfully killed 2 caliphs, and many viziers, sultans and crusader leaders. Under leadership of Imam Muqtayyid Qushar, the Nizari state declined internally, and was eventually destroyed as the Imam surrendered the castles to the invading Mongols. Sources on the history and thought of the Ismailis in this period are therefore lacking, and the majority extant are written by their detractors. Long after their near eradication, mentions of assassins were preserved within European sources such as the writings of Marco Polo, where they are depicted as trained killers, responsible for the systematic elimination of opposing figures. Ever since, the word assassin has been used to describe a hired or professional killer, paving the way for the related term, assassination, which denotes any action involving murder of a high-profile target for political reasons. The Nizari were feared by the Crusaders, who refer to them collectively as assassins. The Crusader stories of the assassins were further embellished by Marco Polo. 19th-century European Orientalist historians such as Joseph von Hammer-Purgstall also referred to the Nizari collectively as assassins and tended to write works about them based on biased accounts by medieval Sunni Arab authors, which they often took at face value. The name assassin is often said to derive from the Arabic word hashishin, or users of hashish, a term thought to have been derogatory and used by their adversaries during the Middle Ages. Originally applied to the Nizari Ismailis by the rival Mustali Ismailis during the fall of the Ismaili Fatimid Empire and the separation of the two Ismaili streams, there is little evidence hashish was used to motivate the assassins, contrary to the beliefs of their medieval enemies. It is possible that the term hashishia or hashishi in Muslim sources was used metaphorically in its abusive sense origins. The origins of the assassins can be traced back to just before the First Crusade, around 1080. There has been great difficulty finding out much information about the origins of the assassins because most early sources are written by enemies of the order, are based on legends, or both. Most sources dealing with the order's inner workings were destroyed with the capture of Alamut, the assassins' headquarters, by the Mongols in 1256. However, it is possible to trace the beginnings of the cult back to its first Grand Master, Hassan I Sabah. A passionate devotee of Ismaili beliefs, Hassan I Sabah was well liked throughout Cairo, Syria and most of the Middle East by other Ismaili, which led to a number of people becoming his followers. Using his fame and popularity, Sabah founded the Order of the Assassins. While his motives for founding this order are ultimately unknown, it was said to be all for his own political and personal gain and to also exact vengeance on his enemies. Because of the unrest in the Holy Land caused by the Crusades, Hassan I Sabah found himself not only fighting for power with other Muslims, but also with the invading Christian forces. After creating the order, Sabah searched for a location that would be fit for a sturdy headquarters and decided on the fortress at Alamut in what is now northwestern Iran. It is still disputed whether Sabah built the fortress himself or if it was already built at the time of his arrival. After laying claim to the fortress at Alamut, Sabah began expanding his influence outwards to nearby towns and districts, using his agents to gain political favor and to intimidate the local populations. Spending most of his days at Alamut producing religious works and developing doctrines for his order, Sabah would never leave his fortress again in his lifetime. He had established a secret society of deadly assassins, which was built on a hierarchical structure. Below Sabah, the grand headmaster of the order, were those known as greater propagandists, followed by the normal propagandists, the Rafiqs, and the Lajiks. It was the Lajiks who were trained to become some of the most feared assassins, or as they were called, Fidai, in the known world. It is, however, unknown how Hasani Sabah was able to get to his Fidai and to perform with such fervent loyalty. One theory, possibly the best known but also the most criticized, comes from the reports of Marco Polo during his travels to the Orient. He recounts a story he heard of the old man of the mountain, who would drug his young followers with hashish, lead them to a paradise, and then claim that only he had the means to allow for their return. Perceiving that Sabah was either a prophet or magician, his disciples, believing that only he could return them to paradise, were fully committed to his cause and willing to carry out his every request. However, this story is disputed due to the fact that Sabah died in 1124 and Sanaa, who was frequently known as the Old Man of the Mountain, died in 1192, whereas Marco Polo was not born until around 1254. With his new weapons, Sabah began to order assassinations, ranging from politicians to great generals. Assassins would rarely attack ordinary citizens though, and tended not to be hostile towards them. Although the Fidaian were the lowest rank in Sabah's order and were only used as expendable pawns to do the Grand Master's bidding, much time and many resources were put into training them. The assassins were generally young in age, giving them the physical strength and stamina which would be required to carry out these murders. However, physical prowess was not the only trait that was required to be a Fidai. To get to their targets, the assassins had to be patient, cold, and calculating. They were generally intelligent and well-read because they were required to possess not only knowledge about their enemy, but his or her culture and the native language. They were trained by their masters to disguise themselves and sneak into enemy territory to perform the assassinations, instead of simply attacking their target outright. Etymology. The assassins were finally linked by the 19th-century Orientalist scholar Sylvestre de Sacy to the Arabic word hashish, using their variant names, assassin and assassini, in the 19th century. Citing the example of one of the first written applications of the Arabic term hashish to the Ismailis by 13th-century historian Abu Shama, de Sacy demonstrated its connection to the name given to the Ismailis throughout Western scholarship. The first known usage of the term hashishi has been traced back to 1122 when the Fatimid Caliph Al-Amir employed it in derogatory reference to the Syrian Nazaris. Used figuratively, the term hashishi connoted meanings such as outcasts or rabble. Without actually accusing the group of using the hashish drug, the caliph used the term in a pejorative manner. This label was quickly adopted by anti-Ismaili historians and applied to the Ismailis of Syria and Persia. The spread of the term was further facilitated through military encounters between the Nizaris and the Crusaders, whose chroniclers adopted the term and disseminated it across Europe. During the medieval period, a Western scholarship on the Ismailis contributed to the popular view of the community as a radical sect of assassins, believed to be trained for the precise murder of their adversaries. By the 14th century, European scholarship on the topic had not advanced much beyond the work and tales from the Crusaders. The origins of the word forgotten. Across Europe the term assassin had taken the meaning of professional murderer. In 1603 the first Western publication on the topic of the assassins was authored by a court official for King Henry IV of France and was mainly based on the narratives of Marco Polo from his visits to the Near East. While he assembled the accounts of many Western travelers, the author failed to explain the etymology of the term assassin. According to Lebanese writer Amin Mayalouf, their contemporaries in the Muslim world would call them hashishiyun, hashish smokers. Some Orientalists thought that this was the origin of the word assassin, which in many European languages was more terrifying, yet the truth is different. According to texts that have come down to us from Alamut, Hassan Isabar liked to call his disciples Asasiyun, meaning people who are faithful to the Asas, meaning foundation of the faith. This is the word, misunderstood by foreign travelers, that seemed similar to hashish. Another modern author, Edward Berman, states that many scholars have argued, and demonstrated convincingly, that the attribution of the epithet hashish eaters or hashish takers is a misnomer derived from enemies of the Ismailis and was never used by Muslim chroniclers or sources. It was therefore used in a pejorative sense of enemies or disreputable people. This sense of the term survived into modern times with the common Egyptian usage of the term hashashin in the 1930s to mean simply noisy or riotous. It is unlikely that the austere Hassan Isabar indulged personally in drug-taking. There is no mention of that drug hashish in connection with the Persian assassins, especially in the library of Alamut. Military tactics. They call him Sheikh al-Hashishim. He is their elder, and upon his command all of the men of the mountain come out or go in. They are believers of the word of their elder, and everyone everywhere fears them, because they even kill kings, Benjamin of Tudela, in pursuit of their religious and political goals. The Ismailis adopted various military strategies popular in the Middle Ages. One such method was that of assassination, the selective elimination of prominent rival figures. The murders of political adversaries were usually carried out in public spaces, creating resounding intimidation for other possible enemies. Throughout history, many groups have resorted to assassination as a means of achieving political ends. In the Ismaili context, these assignments were performed by Fida'is of the Ismaili mission. They were unique in that civilians were never targeted. The assassinations were committed against those whose elimination would most greatly reduce aggression against the Ismailis and, in particular, against those who had perpetrated massacres against the community. A single assassination was usually employed in favor of widespread bloodshed resulting from factional combat. Hashashin are also said to be adept in Fa'izya, or the Islamic warrior code, where they are trained in combat, disguises, and equestrianism. Codes of conduct are followed, and the Hashashin are taught in the art of war, linguistics, and strategies. Hashashin never allowed their women to be at their fortresses during military campaigns, both for protection and secrecy. This is a tradition first made by Hassan when he sent his wife and daughters to Girdku when a famine was created during the Seljuk siege of Alamut. For about 2 centuries, the Hashashin specialized in assassinating their religious and political enemies. These killings were often conducted in full view of the public and often in broad daylight, so as to instill terror in their foes. Assassinations were primarily carried out with a dagger, which was sometimes tipped with poison. Due to being immensely outnumbered in enemy territory, the Hashashin tended to specialize in covert operations. Hashashin would often assimilate themselves in the towns and regions of their targets and, over time, stealthily insert themselves into strategic positions. They did not always kill their targets, however, preferring at times to try to threaten an enemy into submission. This could sometimes be accomplished with a dagger and a threatening note placed on an enemy's pillow. The assassin group was indeed feared enough so that these threats were sometimes taken seriously, as in the case when Saladin The Muslim Sultan of Egypt and Syria made an alliance with the rebel sect in order to avoid more attempts on his life. One of these attempts involved the assassins placing a poisoned cake on Saladin's chest as he slept, with a warning note to desist from his military exploits. In the heat of battle, under no circumstances did assassins commit suicide unless it was absolutely necessary, preferring to be killed by their captors. The first instance of murder in the effort to establish a Nizari-Ismaili state in Persia is widely considered to be the killing of Seljuk vizier, Nizam al-Mulk, carried out by a man dressed as a Sufi whose identity remains unclear. The vizier's murder in a Seljuk court is distinctive of exactly the type of visibility for which missions of the Fida East have been significantly exaggerated. While the Seljuks and Crusaders both employed murder as a military means of disposing of factional enemies, during the Alamut period almost any murder of political significance in the Islamic lands was attributed to the Ismailis. So inflated had this association grown that, in the work of Orientalist scholars such as Bernard Lewis, the Ismailis were equated with the politically active Fida'is and thus were regarded as a radical and heretical sect known as the Assassins. The military approach of the Nizari-Ismaili state was largely a defensive one, with strategically chosen sites that appeared to avoid confrontation wherever possible without the loss of life. But the defining characteristic of the Nizari-Ismaili state was that it was scattered geographically throughout Persia and Syria. The Alamut castle therefore was only one of a nexus of strongholds throughout the regions where Ismailis could retreat to safety if necessary. West of Alamut in the Sharud Valley, the major fortress of Lamazar served as just one example of such retreat. In the context of their political uprising, the various spaces of Ismaili military presence took on the name Dar al-Hijra. The notion of the Dar al-Hijra originates from the time of Muhammad, who migrated with his followers from intense persecution to safe haven in Yathrib. In this way, the Fatimids found their Dar al-Hijra in North Africa. From 1101 to 1118, attacks and sieges were made on the fortresses, conducted by combined forces of Seljuk, Berkuruk, and Sunja, although with the cost of lives and the capture and execution of assassin Diyamud ibn Hattish. The Hashashin managed to hold their ground and repel the attacks until the Mongol invasion. Likewise, during the revolt against the Seljuks, several fortresses served as spaces of refuge for the Ismailis. Assassination at their peak, many of the assassinations of the day were often attributed to the Hashashin, even though the Crusaders and the other factions employed personal assassins. The fact that the Hashashin performed their assassinations in full view of the public, often in broad daylight, gave them the reputation assigned to them. Psychological warfare, and attacking the enemy's psyche was another often employed tactic of the Hashashin, who would sometimes attempt to draw their opponents into submission rather than risk killing them. During the Seljuk invasion after the death of Muhammad Topar, a new Seljuk sultan emerged with the coronation of Topar's son Sunja. When Sunja rebuffed the Hashashin ambassadors who were sent by Hassan for peace negotiations, Hassan sent his Hashashin to the Sultan. Sunja woke up one morning with a dagger stuck in the ground beside his bed. Alarmed, he kept the matter a secret. A messenger from Hassan arrived and stated, "Did I not wish the Sultan well that the dagger which was struck in the hard ground would have been planted on your soft breast?" For the next several decades there ensued a ceasefire between the Nizaris and the Seljuk. Sunja himself pensioned the Hashashin on taxes collected from the lands they owned, gave them grants and licenses, and even allowed them to collect tolls from travelers. Downfall and aftermath. The assassins were eradicated by the Mongol Empire during the well-documented invasion of Khwarizm. They probably dispatched their assassins to kill Monka Khan. Thus, a decree was handed over to the Mongol commander Kitbuka, who began to assault several Hashashin fortresses in 1253 before Hulagu's advance in 1256. The Mongols besieged Alamut on December 15, 1256. The assassins recaptured and held Alamut for a few months in 1275, but they were crushed and the political power was lost forever. The Syrian branch of the assassins was taken over by the Mamluk Sultan Baybars in 1273. The Mamluks continued to use the services of the remaining assassins. Ibn Battuta reported in the 14th century their fixed rate of paper murder. In exchange, they were allowed to exist. Eventually, they resorted to the act of taqiyya, hiding their true identities until their imams would awaken them. According to the historian Yaqut al-Hamawi, the Bozormeni, however, following the establishment of the Christian Kingdom of Hungary, their community was vanquished by the end of the 13th century due to the Inquisitions ordered by the Catholic Church during the reign of Koloman, King of Hungary. It is said that the assassins are the ancestors of those given the surname Harjali, derived from the word harjal, a rare species of bird found in the mountains of Syria near Masyaf. The harjal was often used as a symbol of the assassin's order.